Danielle Clode, on the other hand, is tiny. She too studies megafauna, this time in Australia. She's based at Museum Victoria, and her latest book is called Prehistoric Giants.
When we think of giant prehistoric beasts, we tend to think of dinosaurs, those long-extinct reptiles which dominated our planet well over 65 million years ago. But giants also walked the Earth quite recently. The age of the megafauna was only 60,000 years ago, a time when our ancestors shared the Earth with huge mammals, birds and reptiles. Most people are familiar with the saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths of the Northern Hemisphere, but Australia had its own unique collection of giants, and as you might expect from the land of marsupials, Australia's megafauna were often quite unlike anything found anywhere else. There were many species which were simply upsized versions of our modern fauna. The koalas were that bit bigger then, and the red kangaroos stood half a metre taller. Some of these upsized beasts would have been fairly formidable, with echidnas the size of a large dog and wombats weighing in at 200 kilograms. Australia in the last ice age was still dominated by kangaroos, much as it is today, but many of these kangaroos were very different to the ones we have now. Aside from the modern kangaroos like the red and eastern grey, many belonged to a completely different group, known as the short-faced kangaroos. There were dozens of different species of short-faced kangaroos, many standing around 2 metres tall. With their flat faces, bipedal stance and highly mobile arms, they must have looked quite human-like in the forests of the Pleistocene. Most of these ancient kangaroos probably lived much as modern kangaroos do, except that they browsed on trees and shrubs rather than grazing on grass. One species, however, took a very different path. A giant rat kangaroo might not seem like the stuff of nightmares, but this ancient relative of the shy fungus-eating rat kangaroos of the Australian rainforest had a secret history. Its great shearing teeth were not for eating mushrooms, but revealed the characteristic wear marks of a specialist carnivore. Disturbing though the concept of a killer kangaroo might be, the giant rat kangaroo would have been the least of your worries in the Pleistocene. Thylacoleo, a leopard-like marsupial predator, lurked in the forest to ambush its prey with crushingly powerful jaws. Wanambi, a 5-metre-long python, hid in the southern caves. Megalania, a giant goanna the size of a saltwater crocodile, stalked the landscape. And in addition to the modern saltwater crocodiles, there were also 2 other large crocodilians, the terrestrial quincana and the giant Palomnarchus. While the reptiles looked ferocious, not all of them were as formidable as their appearance. The giant horned tortoises of Queensland may have trundled about like armoured tanks with spiked tails, but they were probably peaceful herbivores, the last survivors of a family that once spread across the Pacific. The flocks of mihirung were probably also fairly peaceable. These birds, the height of a modern emu but 5 times the weight, were actually most closely related to ducks. They once roamed across the southern plains of Australia, but now only their fossils and eggs remain as evidence of their abundance. But none of these creatures are the true giants of the Australian megafauna. That crown belongs to the Diprotodon. These great beasts were the size of small 4-wheel drive cars, up to 3 metres long and weighing over 2.5 tonnes. They may have been huge, but it seems unlikely they were particularly aggressive. For one thing, they have unusually fragile skulls, with most of the space being taken up with air-filled cavities. This light skull may have enabled them to reach up into the canopy to browse, an idea supported by their highly flexible front ankle joints and the way their footprints show them walking delicately on their front toes. The relatives of the Diprotodon are equally unparalleled today. The forests of the Australian Pleistocene were also home to Zygomaturus, which may have been partially aquatic, rather like a modern hippo, and perhaps had a small trunk. Another relative, Palaeocestes, was equipped with powerful curved forearms ending in large hooked claws. These weren't for digging, but seem to have been for ripping the branches or bark from the trees. Its long, flexible tongue would also have been well suited to grasping foliage, just as giraffes do today. The forests and plains of the Australian bush would have been home to a very different suite of animals when people first settled here 60,000 years ago. But was it humans that made them disappear? Or was the changing climate responsible for the loss of these giants? It's unlikely that this question can ever be satisfactorily resolved, but what we do know from the extinction of the Australian megafauna is that some species seem particularly vulnerable to extinction. The largest, the most specialised, the slowest breeders, the isolated species, all seem particularly vulnerable to changes in their environment, whether those changes are man-made or natural. We may never see the likes of the Diprotodon roaming the Australian countryside, but we have plenty of other unique and remarkable species that are just as vulnerable to extinction today. It would be a shame to see them go the same way as the megafauna, leaving nothing but footsteps and fossils behind them.
Danielle Clode's book is called Prehistoric Giants, the Megafauna of Australia. She's at the Museum of Victoria, and I see that her renowned colleague there, John Long, has just brought out a book of his own for children, starring Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion.